Hi everyone, Dr. Byrne here for another episode of Revive TV. This week's episode is the first in a two-part video series around the 5 requirements to optimal health and well-being. Today we're going to share with you the first 3. Before we discuss the 5 requirements and today share you the first 3 requirements of optimal health and well-being, I first want to discuss what optimal health and well-being is and how we measure it. And the reason I want to do that is because oftentimes, in my experience, people judge their health on how they feel. If I ask you or ask any one of my patients, how do you feel? Or how's your health? Invariably, the answer is about how they feel. Whether it's, I feel great, I feel good, I feel bad, lousy, whatever the term they use, is they give back a feeling of how they perceive their health. Now, in optimal health, just judging our health on how we feel leaves out a very significant part of what is to be truly healthy. I want to give you an example first of what I mean, and then it might make more sense as we go. You may have known or have come across or would have at least heard of people who have had sudden illness that were otherwise healthy but had a sudden illness. Let's say it was a heart attack. It's the most common one we hear. They were otherwise healthy, they exercised, but they had a heart attack, and they may have passed away, or they may have had the challenges associated with having that heart attack. So they had a feeling that they weren't well in the sense that they had the heart attack, they had the symptom. But the question I would ask is, did the symptom and the health just deteriorate in that moment, or was there already some dysfunction occurring before the symptom or the feeling occurred? And the answer is pretty obvious, that there was obviously always, invariably at least, some dysfunction going on underneath before the symptom presented itself. So if we're talking about optimal health and we're measuring it in and just how we feel, we may be missing this whole lead-up part where there might be some dysfunction going on underneath. So if we're going to be optimally well and optimally healthy, we need to be able to measure those things. So that's not the topic of today, the different types of measurements you can do. We might discuss that in a later video, but I wanted to get around the idea that health is not just about how you feel, it's how you function. So to optimally function well and at your best, there are certain requirements, and that is the topic of today's video or TV show. So we're going to share with you the first 3 requirements that you will need to be optimally well. So let's start with number 1, and this is going to be pretty obvious, and most of you, when you are trying to change your health, this is probably the first thing you do, and that is you need to have the proper nutrition. You need nutrition, or food is a requirement. Now, within nutrition, there are certain other requirements. I want to give you an example, very briefly. Fat is a nutritional requirement to optimal health. Things like our brain require fat as an energy source to help it function at its best. And with our brain being the most important organ in our body because it controls every function of our body, then getting good fat nutrients into our body is really important. So the difference between a requirement and maybe something you can tolerate, for example, you may be able to tolerate grains, whether it's a wheat grain, whether it's spelt or any other type of grain. Your body may tolerate it better than say others, but and you might not have any adverse effects. However, grains in themselves aren't necessarily a requirement to optimal health. You may be able to take them without any adverse effects, but are they actually making you healthier? Not necessarily. Okay, so there's a difference between a nutritional requirement and a nutritional tolerance. Some people are gluten intolerant and others are not. So we can take it, but does gluten serve a purpose in our diets, in our nutritional requirements? It certainly doesn't. So the first thing we need to do is make sure we have proper nutrition. So that includes good fats, good proteins, plenty of vegetables, and a limited space of fruits as well. Good nuts have good fats in them as well. The second of our requirements of health will be another thing you'll be familiar with. It's usually the second thing that everyone does when they're changing their health, and that is movement or exercise. So our bodies require movement. We don't do well with sitting down. So once again, I'm going to go back to the brain because the brain controls every function of the body. The brain optimally functions best when it's moving. It's why when you move and exercise, that when you finish, you'll often say you feel more alert and awake, even if you're a bit tired and fatigued from the exercise. If you sat down all day watching television or reading a book and you're just resting to get some energy, you'll often find at the end of the day that you're feeling more tired than when you began. And that's because there was no movement of your spine. So our bodies require full movement. That is so that our joints and our muscles get the activation they need, so they don't get we don't lose muscle strength, that we don't lose our range of motion. But most importantly, movement is the single greatest nutrient to our brain. And if we want to be optimally well, we need our brains being optimally well. So how often should we move? Well, we should be moving daily. What kind of exercise should we be doing? Which should be a variety. We should move a lot slowly, so that's walking. So one of the things I suggest is, walking to the shops, walking to the train station. If you can avoid your car or park it a little further away from work, 500 meters from work, so you're walking that little bit. Take the stairs, walk up the escalator rather than just stand on it. So there's some little examples from a general movement. We like functional movement. So that's because we don't necessarily work outdoors a lot anymore. We're not building huts, apart from people who are tradespeople. Then functional movements, and that's why classes like CrossFit, F45, all these functional type of classes are really important because they move the whole body just as we were designed to do. We need to break the pattern, especially if you're sedentary, of sitting all day by at least by moving around. So I would say 2 to 3 times a week we need to be lifting weights and moving functionally. We also need to move fast. So you can do that with your functional movements. We need to get our heart rate up. Our hearts operate best when they're under short amounts of, when I say operate best, to get optimal healthy heart, it likes short, sharp bursts. Okay, it's a muscle that likes to be worked, then rest, then work, then rest. So sprinting, whatever that is, whether that's running, swimming fast, cycling on a rower, whatever it is that's fast for you, it's important to do that 2 or 3 times a week. And the fourth one is to be mobile. So stretching, whether that's yoga or any other type of stretching class, it's really important that we keep our mobility. So move often, move fast, lift something, and get mobile. They're the 4 requirements within the requirement of movement. And the third one I'm going to share for you today is sleep, rest. So our bodies require rest to recuperate. So our organs at night when we sleep, our organs and all our systems get a chance to kind of chill out, to kind of regenerate and check in and make sure that we're working the best that we can. So, what is the adequate amount of sleep? Well, I think anywhere between 6 to 8 hours of good quality sleep. The best quality sleep we get is before, what we found is before midnight. I know that I can operate pretty well on 6 hours if I get a good quality. Some people require 8. So somewhere between the 6 to 8 hours of good quality sleep, preferably uninterrupted. So they're the first 3 requirements of health, or optimal health and well-being. Next week, we're going to share with you the last 2. And these 2, in my opinion, are the most neglected 2 requirements to being optimally well. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you next week for another episode of Revive TV.